The year is 527 AD, and the most powerful throne in the known world sits empty in Constantinople. The Byzantine Empire stretches from the shores of the Black Sea to the deserts of North Africa, controlling trade routes that generate unimaginable wealth. But succession to this throne has always been a game played by aristocrats, military generals, and the ancient patrician families who trace their bloodlines back to the Roman Republic. Never, in over 1,000 years of imperial history, has someone from the absolute bottom of society even dreamed of touching such power. Yet in the shadowy corridors of the great palace, whispers spread like wildfire through marble halls. The new emperor, Justinian, has chosen his empress, and when the courtiers learn her identity, their faces drain of colour. She is not a princess from a neighbouring kingdom. She is not the daughter of a senator or the widow of a respected general. She is Theodora, a woman whose past would make seasoned soldiers blush with embarrassment. A woman who began life performing acts so degrading that chroniclers of the time could barely bring themselves to record the details. This is the story of perhaps the most extraordinary rise to power in human history, a tale that reads like fiction but is documented in the official histories of the empire. Before diving into this forgotten story of survival and transformation, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. The Constantinople of the early 6th century was a city of violent contrasts. Magnificent churches with golden domes rose above districts where human misery festered in narrow, filthy alleys. The hippodrome could hold 100,000 spectators who would cheer for chariot races, while just blocks away, desperate families sold their children into slavery to buy bread. It was into this world that Theodora was born, sometime around 497 AD, in one of the poorest quarters of the city. Her father, Acacius, worked as a bearkeeper at the hippodrome, one of the lowest occupations in Byzantine society. His job was to care for the massive brown bears that were used in the arena's brutal spectacles, feeding them, cleaning their cages, and preparing them to tear condemned criminals apart for the entertainment of the masses. The smell of blood and animal waste clung to him constantly, marking his family as untouchable in the rigid social hierarchy of the empire. When Acacius died suddenly, Theodora's mother faced a choice that no parent should ever have to make. With 3 young daughters and no means of support, she could watch them starve, or she could find a way to survive in a world that offered women like her only one real option. The entertainment industry of Byzantium was brutal and exploitative, but it was also one of the few places where a woman could earn enough to eat. Theodora's mother took her 3 daughters to the hippodrome and began training them as performers. But this was not the refined entertainment we might imagine. The shows at the hippodrome were crude, violent, and explicitly sexual. Audiences came not just for chariot races and gladiatorial combat, but for performances that pushed the boundaries of public decency far beyond what even the most liberal modern society would accept. Theodora started as a child actress in these spectacles, but as she grew older, the nature of her performances became increasingly degrading. The historian Procopius, writing in his secret history of the period, describes acts so explicit and humiliating that scholars still debate whether his accounts were exaggerated propaganda or genuine historical record. What we know for certain is that Theodora became one of the most sought-after performers in Constantinople's entertainment district, famous not for her acting ability, but for her willingness to participate in shows that others refused. The theatres and brothels of 6th century Constantinople were places where human dignity went to die. Women who worked in these establishments were considered barely human by the upper classes. their bodies treated as commodities to be bought, used, and discarded. They had no legal rights, no protection from violence, and no hope of escape from their circumstances. Most died young from disease, violence, or despair. But Theodora possessed something that set her apart from her fellow performers. Contemporary accounts describe her as extraordinarily beautiful, with large, dark eyes and a presence that could command attention in any room. More importantly, she had a sharp intelligence that allowed her to navigate the dangerous world of Byzantine entertainment with remarkable skill. While other actresses were merely victims of their circumstances, Theodora began to see her situation as a stepping stone to something greater. The entertainment world also gave her something invaluable, an education in human nature that no aristocratic woman could ever receive. Night after night, she performed for audiences that included everyone from drunken soldiers to wealthy merchants to bored senators looking for excitement outside their marble palaces. She learned to read people, to understand their desires and weaknesses, to manipulate their emotions with a glance or a gesture. As Theodora moved into her 20s, she began to attract the attention of more powerful patrons. These were not the crude soldiers and craftsmen who made up most of her audience, but men with real influence in the empire's political and economic systems. One of these was Hectebulus, the governor of Pentapolis in North Africa, who became so infatuated with Theodora that he brought her to his province as his mistress. This relationship offered Theodora her first real taste of power and luxury. In Cyrenaica, she lived in a palace, commanded servants, and experienced life among the ruling class. But it also showed her how precarious her position remained. When Hectebulus tired of her, as she had always known he would, she found herself abandoned in a foreign land with no resources and no way to return home. The journey back to Constantinople was a nightmare that nearly broke her. Stranded in Alexandria with no money, she was forced to return to the only profession she knew, working in the brothels and taverns that served the city's port district. The men she encountered there were often violent and dangerous. Sailors and merchants who viewed women like her as objects to be used and forgotten. But something had changed in Theodora during her time in North Africa. She had seen how the other half lived, had experienced real power, and had developed a vision of what her life could become if she played her cards correctly. The woman who returned to Constantinople was no longer the desperate actress who had left. She was someone with a plan. The Constantinople she returned to was also changing. A new emperor had taken the throne, a man named Justin who had risen from humble origins as a peasant soldier to become the most powerful person in the world. More importantly, his nephew and heir apparent, Justinian, was known for his unconventional attitudes and his willingness to associate with people from all levels of society. Theodora understood that timing would be everything. She couldn't simply approach the future emperor as a former actress and prostitute seeking his attention. The Byzantine court was filled with ambitious women who had already tried and failed to capture Justinian's interest through conventional means. What she needed was a complete transformation, not just of her appearance, but of her entire identity. The first step was establishing herself in a respectable profession. Using contacts she had made during her years in the entertainment industry, Theodora began working as a wool spinner, one of the few trades that allowed women to earn an independent living. The work was tedious and poorly paid, but it gave her something invaluable: respectability. For the first time in her adult life, she could walk through the streets of Constantinople without being immediately recognized as a prostitute. But Theodora's real education during this period came from an unexpected source. She began attending the sermons of a radical Christian preacher who advocated for the rights of the poor and condemned the excesses of the wealthy. This exposure to monophysite Christianity would prove crucial to her later political career. But more immediately, it taught her how to present herself as a woman of genuine religious conviction, rather than merely another ambitious courtesan. The transformation was remarkable. Gone were the gaudy costumes and heavy makeup of her performing days. Instead, Theodora dressed simply, spoke softly, and carried herself with a dignity that seemed almost supernatural to those who had known her before. She learned to read and write with surprising speed, devouring religious texts and philosophical treatises with the same intensity she had once brought to perfecting her stage performances. When Theodora finally arranged to meet Justinian at a private gathering in 522 AD, she was no longer the desperate actress who had fled to North Africa. She was a poised, intelligent woman who could discuss theology, politics, and literature with equal sophistication. But beneath this polished exterior lay all the cunning and survival instincts she had developed during her years in Constantinople's underworld. The meeting between Theodora and Justinian has been described by historians as one of those moments when the entire course of world history pivoted on a single encounter. Justinian, who was then in his early 40s, was known as a serious, scholarly man who had shown little interest in marriage or romantic entanglements. He was completely unprepared for someone like Theodora. What struck him first was not her beauty, though she remained stunning, but her mind. Here was a woman who could match his intellectual curiosity, who understood the complex religious and political issues facing the empire, and who brought a perspective shaped by experiences no aristocrat could ever imagine. Their conversations would stretch long into the night, covering everything from the nature of divine authority to the practical challenges of governing a diverse empire. But Theodora was careful never to fully reveal the depths of her past during these early encounters. She allowed Justinian to believe she had been a minor actress who had found religion and reformed her life. The full truth about her years in the brothels and theatres remained carefully hidden, shared only in carefully edited versions that emphasized her victimization rather than her active participation in the entertainment industry's most degrading spectacles. The relationship that developed between them was unlike anything the Byzantine court had seen before. Justinian, who had always been something of an outsider himself due to his peasant origins, found in Theodora a kindred spirit who understood what it meant to rise above one's circumstances through sheer force of will. For Theodora, Justinian represented not just security and status, but genuine intellectual companionship with someone who valued her mind as much as her beauty. As their relationship deepened, Theodora began to reveal more of her true nature to Justinian. She showed him the steel beneath her refined exterior, the calculating intelligence that had allowed her to survive in situations that would have destroyed most people. Far from being repelled by these qualities, Justinian found himself increasingly fascinated by this woman who combined such apparent contradictions in a single person. The transformation of Theodora from prostitute to imperial consort was not without its challenges. Byzantine law explicitly prohibited senators and other high-ranking officials from marrying actresses, a category that included anyone who had ever performed on stage. This meant that even if Justinian wanted to marry Theodora, he would be legally prevented from doing so unless the law itself was changed. Theodora's journey from the filthy alleyways of Constantinople to the golden throne of Byzantium stands as perhaps history's most extraordinary testament to human ambition and reinvention. The woman who began life performing unspeakable acts for crowds of drunken soldiers became the most powerful female ruler of her age, reshaping an empire through sheer force of will. Her story reminds us that in the grand theatre of history, the most unlikely characters sometimes steal the greatest scenes, transforming not just their own destinies, but the fate of civilizations themselves.